final speaker at the Humor Research Conference this year. It is the remarkable Dr. Salvatore Attardo. You might not recognize the name. He's really new and budding in the field of humor scholars. I think this is his first academic presentation ever. I haven't looked at a CV in a while, but last I remember it was like 1 page long. And I was told earlier that he bought these slides off of an undergraduate earlier today. So I don't really know what we're expecting, but I did want to just acknowledge and also thank Dr. Attardo for the conference and all his work and for his mentorship and work in the field of humor research. He's going to be presenting now on a new visual logical mechanism.
Thank you. And how many are you recording? Yes, okay.
Yeah.
All right, very good. So today I want to talk about a visual logical mechanism. So of course we all know that there is purely visual humor. So yesterday I found these images. I did the Google search for funny dogs, funny cats, and then for caricature, right? And that's, by the way, Doge, the original Doge dog. But these are other dogs looking funny, and the cat, I think we can all agree, the cat looks funny. And of course, the caricature, I think, I don't think anybody's going to challenge that this is funny stuff. Now, we've always known about blends of visual and verbal humor, right? So we get cartoons, for example. These have been looked at forever. And particularly people have focused on the interplay between the caption and the visual, okay? So this is a very good example of exactly this. And if you analyze the cartoon, as I have done, you can see that the incongruity is between the setup, which is in the caption, and parts of the image that's compatible with the panel, scholarly panel, roughly what we're doing right now, except of course in person. And then the other half of the visual is the situation, the script for the joke. A priest, an imam, and a rabbi walk into a bar. Okay, so it's the setting for joke. Okay. So what tells us that, so the script for panel is obviously activated by the word panel, okay? Also, the fact that there is somebody here with a lectern, with a microphone, that's what we expect from, academic presentations, right? Now, on the other hand, the script for joke is a little bit more complicated to get to because we have these 3 people here and this 4th guy who's standing. And you can tell that this one is a priest because of the collar. This one is an imam because of the beard and the turban, right? And this one is a Jew because you can tell from a rabbi, probably you can tell from the locks and the hat. That this guy is a bartender. He's wearing an apron. He's wearing a bow tie, and here you can see the martini glasses, the bottles of liquor, right? So this activates the script for bar. And then, of course, you have to know the joke, the style or the kind of joke, where it's 3 or 2 or 3 particular fates walk into a bar and then funny stuff happens. So we have then an incongruity, script opposition, if you wish, between the scholarly panel and the joke situation. And of course, then the resolution is that the panel is on interfaith humor. So now there is a reason why you have 3 people from 3 different faiths. It's an interfaith panel. And there is a reason for it being a joke, right? Because it's about humor, right? So again, in the usual non-serious resolution, right? The funny, playful resolution, partial revolution, there is some degree of explanation of what is going on. Okay, so again, as I said, we're all familiar with purely visual humor. We're all familiar with mixed humor. What I want now, however, is purely visual humor that is absolutely untranslatable, okay, where the mechanisms of humor are unique to the visual domain. So in this cartoon here, we could turn this fairly easily into a regular text, right? Where we would say, there's a priest and an imam and a rabbi are sitting there. You don't have to have the visual. The visual is just because, well, this is a cartoon, it's a multimodal kind of text, but you could very easily translate it into language. Okay, you could verbalize it, and nothing really would be the problem. So what I want is visual humor that is, essentially impossible to translate, but is not just a funny dog or a caricature. Okay, so that's the very fine path that I want to thread. And here's what I found that meets these requirements. This is the work of a Japanese artist, Tatsuya Tanaka, who started this miniature calendar more than 14, 15 years ago. And as you can see, the whole concept, he does this, one of these a day. So there's at this point hundreds, maybe even thousands. So they're everyday objects. Here's a sushi roll, here's a slice of lemon, this is a brush, an egg, some broccoli and some fruit, and then adds figurines and other teeny tiny props, and creates these scenes in which the affordances of the objects change completely due to scale, and I'm going to talk about this in some detail. So here's his web page. By the way, you can go and check it out. This is the most recent one. It's February of 2025. So it's literally what he's doing right now. Earlier we were talking with Kiki about aggressive humor that has a target, etc. This is definitely gentle, non-aggressive, surreal humor, right? I mean, there's no nastiness here. Nobody's being put down by this humor. And this is a quote from his website where he says, "Everyone must have had thoughts like these. Broccoli and parsley may sometimes look like a forest of trees." Okay? And again, let's go back here. You see what he means by this, right? Now, I don't know that everybody has had thoughts like this, but once you see it, it's hard to unsee it, if you know what I mean, right? He says, everyday occurrences seen from a miniature perspective can bring us lots of fun thoughts, okay? And elsewhere he says, I hope to add a little enjoyment to our everyday life. He doesn't explicitly come out and say that he's being funny, but I think that it's a fair assessment. And by the way, I went online and did some searches, and for example, on Reddit, people say this is really funny. Okay, so this is not just my personal opinion. Now, what I want to be very clear about, these are not metaphors. Okay, so we're not talking about a metaphorical reference. We're talking possibly about similes, but I don't think that these are similes here. Maybe more like a comparison between two things, and that's as far as I'm willing to go. This is, by the way, similar to what Noel Carroll in a famous 92 book calls an object analog, which is essentially a visual metaphor, but they're not the same thing. Okay, and what he's talking about are things like using a swordfish as a sword, okay, or using a claw of a crab as a wrench, okay, where you're using an object in a metaphorical sense. This is not it, and again, not a verbal phenomenon, but nonetheless, there's a scriptoposition, and there is a logical mechanism, or if you prefer, an incongruity and the resolution. So I'm going to analyze this particular example to explain what I mean, of course. Now, let me have a little disclaimer. If you want to be picky, here there is some verbal text, okay? But A, I can't read it, it's too small, and B, it's not relevant, okay? All it's there to say is that this is the name of the train station and this is a clock, okay? But you can't read the numbers, you can't read the letters, you know? So I would strongly argue that this is a purely visual text. Okay, so what's the script opposition? Well, obviously sushi and train, right? The situation is a train station, right? I mean, here we have a train on the track that stopped, and you have the station master with the palette sending, and the whistle saying that the train can leave. By the way, my father, that was his job. He was a station master, so I know where I speak of. And then here you have the people lining up to get onto the train. Remember, he's Japanese. If it were in Italy, there would be no line; people would just be jumping in, right? But this is, and then here you have people loading probably coal, right? Because the sushi piece is in the position of the tender for the locomotive, right? So there's no target, okay? Nobody's being made fun of. I don't see who you would be making fun of. Now, the textual organization, let's leave it aside for the time being. I'll get back to it in my last slide. And as far as the semiotics goes, as I said, it's all visual, right? I mean, as I said, this is marginal use of language. I would argue certainly not referential in any way. Now, generalizing the joke. This is another image where he's used the same gag, but in a different context. We realize that there's nothing specific about the sushi, okay? But in fact, any object that shares the general shape of a railroad carriage or a locomotive would do, okay? Provided it's in a serial arrangement, right? So you have two or three in a row, and then you have the paraphernalia, the railroad tracks, the people getting on the train, the subway passage to get to the next track, and so on, right? So what matters is that the shape has to be in this ratio here of roughly 3 by 4, so 3 wide, 4 tall, and 20 long. Okay, that's roughly the ratio of the box, and pretty much anything will do. So here you have sushi rolls, here you have hot dogs, here you have these I don't know, little bags for pencils. I think that's what it is. These are petit four. I mean, they're like pastry, and this is a recorder. All right, but the recorder, because it's visually cut in half by where you screw on the mouthpiece, it works as two shapes, and so it works as well, right? So again, it's not the sushi per se; it's the object, and what I'm arguing is the scale. Okay, so what I mean by this. So first of all, just to be clear. Scale is not the same thing as scalarity. Okay, scalarity, I talked about it in 2022. That was my paper for this conference, and it's a new logical mechanism, but this is different. Okay, scalarity means that it's in a series where you have small and bigger, right? So where things are in an order relative to size. This is scale, as in a railroad model is at scale, right? So the proportions are kept, but in a much smaller or much bigger size, right? So my point here is that logical mechanism is the relative scale of the components of the image. So when you place a sushi roll next to a human figurine, you're suggesting to look at the sushi roll as if it were the scale to match the size of humans. Okay, but of course, sushi rolls are much, much smaller. Okay, in fact, I did the math just for the entertainment. It would take 720 sushi rolls to match the length of a railroad carriage, right? Aside from the fact that that sounds like a great dinner, but obviously we don't think about the size of railroad carriages at that scale. Okay, that is, you would say 20 feet or something like that, but not 720 sushi rolls, right? Is just not, the scale of the two things, the railroad and carriage and the sushi roll, are just incongruous, right? So again, the point here is that you have to have this 3/4/20 ratio of the mass, and it has to be roughly, an oblong mass. A star wouldn't work, right? That is a completely different shape wouldn't work. It has to be roughly the shape. Now, the reason that these images are extremely difficult to describe verbally, now they're still describable, okay? But they're very difficult to describe, is that scale is rarely part of what gets foregrounded linguistically, okay? So when we say railroad carriage, it may be part of our knowledge that there's a certain size that humans have to fit into it, and more than one human for that matter, and so on, right? But we don't have any direct access to the knowledge that a sushi roll is going to be completely of a different scale. Okay, and so that's why we can't relate the two things. In fact, there's 2 orders of magnitude of difference in the scale. Okay, so that's why it's difficult to talk about it, because you can't say, this railway car is 720 sushi pieces long. So because of this difference, of this conceptual difference between the two things, we get the estrangement that causes the perception of unfamiliarity, which is then incongruity. Okay, and then the resolution of the incongruity is the rough match of the shapes, right? So that's where we get the resolution. Now, as I promised, processing order. Now, in this particular image, but also in many other images that I've looked at, there seems to be a preference for this left to right, top to bottom direction, okay, which I've indicated here with the red arrow, right? Now, in this particular case, it is quite possible that he constructed the image deliberately so as to have the tracks start from the top and go down towards the bottom, and the direction of the train with the locomotive at the front is, suggesting this direction, right? So that's quite possible. However, and this is very, very important, we know from previous research that Maria Simaro and others among and myself did a few years ago, that when you process an image, now in our case it was with a caption, but that's not relevant here. The scanning of an image, and we also know this from other studies that didn't deal with humor, the scanning of an image does not necessarily proceed in a left to right, top to bottom direction, okay? So for example, if there is a face in the image, that's where we look, okay? So visual scanning does not always proceed with this order. However, it looks like a lot of images are organized precisely this way. If we go back for a second here, again, what we get is left to right. Okay, that is the scanning goes from here to here, right? That's the way the image is scanned. So Now, again, I'm presenting this as purely speculative. Okay, that is, I've not done the research. I may be poised to do it with Audrey Willoughby, who's interested in working on this. So we may be able to report on this in the future. You know, but there is a possibility that, you know, artists or cartoonists or whatever organize their images in this way because it's easier for them to construct it. Okay, not necessarily easier for you to look at, but it's easier for them to conceive it because you're presenting things in a certain order that is natural because we're used to it. Okay, again, as I said, this is completely speculative and completely guesswork at this point. Okay, so I think I am exactly on time. These are my references. And any questions?
Okay, thank you. I wanted to ask you this about the left to right processing. Have you considered that it may be because of the languages that are the first or main language they have? Because for me, maybe when I look at the image, I would go from right to left because mine is Urdu. So this you can also question or ask and divide into the category by asking the participants how do they look at the image.
Yeah, that's
That's
possible, and there might be cultural differences that are tied exactly to that. So you know, one thing to do would be to look at, I don't know, Arabic
Yeah.
speakers and see whether they process you know, right to left. And there is some evidence with reading that that's the case, but not in the processing of images. That's the interesting thing.
Thank you.
Joe.
Thanks, Al. That was it's really interesting, the processing order of an image, because one thing that I've noticed on looking at cartoons like New Yorker cartoons is the and this might be what you're saying, the incongruity in the image tends to be in the lower right of the image, and that I think is comparable to a verbal joke, a text joke, where the incongruity in the joke, you want to put that at the very end of the joke. You want that to be the last thing you see for various reasons. So it's interesting to think that might be the same in scanning an image. You want the incongruity to be the last thing you see.
Right. I mean, so my hypothesis is weaker than that. That is, my hypothesis is that the cartoonist puts it there because it's easier for them to think of it that way. But we know that image processing does not go left to right, top to bottom. But we don't know. No, I don't think anybody's ever done a study on image constructing by cartoonists. I mean, I should have asked Mankoff if he knows of it, but you know, but as I said, as far as I know, there's no research on this. So,
well, in that case, that's my theory.
Okay,
the most effective way to draw a cartoon is to put the visual incongruity in the lower right, like in the rabbi, the priest, and the imam cartoon. If the bartender had been on the left side of the bar, would the cartoon have been as funny? Because he is sort of the incongruity. It's like, okay, there's a religious figure and there's a guy cleaning glasses. I don't think it would have been.
Be relatively easy to check because all we need to do is get Photoshop and move around the pieces, you know. So, but yeah, it's definitely an interesting thing. Audrey.
Thank you.
This just came to mind. Considering that the 6 knowledge resources, so the general theory of verbal humor works at a cognitive, very competence level, and deals with mechanisms that are often universal before getting into the performance itself. Do you think that we can continue to analyze the knowledge resources at that level once we get into visual humor? Or
does the sociocultural significance of what is in the visuals, must it come into play?
I think you lost me.
When, for example, we are looking at verbal humor
Yeah.
and the mechanisms, we can look at it at a very logical level. Can we always do that with visual humor? This is just coming to, I
don't
can't think of an
see-
exception. I'm just wondering
Yeah.
if you,
I mean, I don't see what the difference would be, in the sense that in order to recognize that, that's a priest, you have to process, the image at some level and recognize the script at some level. So, it's, I mean, again, am I sure of this? No, because we haven't done the research, but I would be really surprised if it turned out that, you couldn't predict at all, because again, when we did the study with the tweets, what we found was that most people, so the majority of people started from the image, but also a very large number of people, surprisingly, started from the caption. And they read the whole caption and then looked at the image, which if you'd ask me, to bet money, I would have never said that. Okay. So, in the case of the New Yorker cartoon, where there's usually a caption, probably some people read the caption first and then look at the image, given that that's what they do with the tweets, So the other thing that we found is that people did what I called exploratory saccades, where they would throw literally one glance, we're talking like milliseconds, on one part of the image and then go read the caption. And with that short of a glance, you can't make out much of the image at all. It's outside of the foveal region, right? But you can get a general idea for what's going on, right? So, in the case of the cartoon with the rabbi and the priest, you probably wouldn't be able to know who these people are, but you would know that there's people sitting or something like that, that level of genericity. But then you might start reading the caption. So I would be surprised if there was nothing to generalize, that it was completely left to, as you were saying, cultural differences or individual preferences or something like that.
thank you.
All right. Any further questions? Oh, Karina.
When I saw these images, I was thinking about what children would do, because I think children would use sushi as a train without any doubt. And I was thinking if part of the humor is not that it is performed by an adult deliberately, because we wouldn't expect that of an adult, but a child would do something like that, I think, naturally. I don't know
Yes.
if it's...
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, in a sense, we're talking about sort of, it's very poetic, if you allow me to use this term, because what we're doing here is using imagination, right? It's like, oh, look, the sushi pieces look like a railroad car, and so I'm gonna put tracks under them, and now I'm gonna build a train station, right? That's very childlike behavior. Now, of course, it's a child with unbelievable resources and incredible skill, and I mean, I dread to think how much putting together one of these miniatures must cost in terms of time and skill set. I mean, it's just like it boggles the mind, right? But there is a certain childlike characteristic to this. That's why I said, this is really non-aggressive humor. It's really sort of innocent. I guess I needed to look at this after studying the humor of the extreme right. That was like, let's look at something Anthony.
Very interesting. I just have a quick question. The artist is making these things by hand and then photographing them.
Correct.
Kind of this new neo-Lilliputian type thing happening.
That's my understanding, yes.
Okay, okay. Are you familiar with the work of? I met a guy in New York, John Avaluto,
No,
and
no.
he makes, when you're asking for like things that are this soft humor, and what he makes cakes and all Italian pastries out of resin. And he has all these installations with like the hand, that's the flowing thing. I can send you these, or I can put them in the chat for you to check out,
Yeah.
because it really immediately brings to my mind, because at first, obviously we're looking through these little screens and I'm like, is this digital imagery? The first thing. And then I think Avaluto is working on something simple because it's very playful. For instance, he has created an inflatable in New York City and many Italian neighborhoods in the Northeast. They have the Madonna that's in her little apps. And he's created an inflatable one and put in front of his house in Brooklyn. And people go in. So there's scale happening there too.
Right.
But this is also working within the tradition of marzipane.
Yeah,
also,
right.
this isn't consumable. So I can send you these or even throw them in the chat if you're interested, because it might be another variation of this to work into your sample.
Absolutely, yes. That sounds very interesting.
And
Thank
another thing I was thinking is, of course, you've obviously goes without saying that you're familiar with eye tracking with AVT and all the studies done on audio, visual translation with subtitles, because that's clearly where the eye goes, is the stuff that comes to my mind. And then I'm also thinking on the original image you showed, what came out to me with seeing, obviously, the joke, the text is there semiotically. My eye goes to the podium, because I'm sitting here thinking of what you're saying. I'm like, well, where is my eye going? And I'm looking at the bookends of the podium and the other person standing. So then I'm wondering, is this looking for power, direction? You know, I mean, again, cognitively speaking, when I'm thinking through this, before going through the characters. So
you mean, you say looking for power? I'm not sure I understand.
the podium as the center of.
Oh, as where the person in charge is.
Right. I mean, and again, the podium or the dais does have a profound semiotic load with us.
Yeah, no, I understand. Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, but it would be very difficult to differentiate between the fact that the podium calls for attention, but also it's on the left, right? So you'd really would have to construct the image, you know, both ways, and then see whether people react to it differently. Joe, we're out of time, but if you want to do quick.
Very quick. And another, as you're talking, it occurred to me another thing that's researchable is the joke funnier if the caption is above the image? It's always below the image, but how would it affect the funniness if that's the first thing you read and then you see the image? And does that?
Well, so in our tweets, some of the captions were above. There was just above, and below. So we didn't notice any particular difference in whether people looked at it, but we weren't checking whether they found it funny. We assumed, you know, that they did. All right, we're out of time. I'm not going to let my